The Apache woman hunted the rancher in the lonely woods, then chose him as her husband. The sun was slowly climbing over the hills, spreading golden light through the quiet forest. The air smelled of pine and dry earth, and the sound of birds singing filled the lonely woods. The forest seemed peaceful, but there was a tension in the air that only someone paying attention could feel. Deep in the woods, a lone rancher walked carefully, his boots crunching over dry leaves and broken twigs. His name was Thomas, and he had been walking this path for years, tending to the cattle that grazed beyond the forest. Today he had a long journey ahead, and the path was quiet, almost too quiet. Unseen, someone was following him. Among the trees, a woman moved with the silent grace of a shadow. Her eyes were sharp, her steps light, barely leaving a mark on the soft forest floor. She was from the Apache people, strong and skilled in the ways of the forest. She had grown up among these trees, learning every sound, every movement, and every secret the woods held. Today, she had noticed the rancher watching him from a distance. She was not angry with him, nor did she intend to hurt him. She was curious, intrigued by this man who moved with care and respect in her forest. Most settlers moved clumsily, crushing the plants and startling the animals, but Thomas was different. He paused to listen. Something felt off. He could not see anyone, but he sensed a presence, something hidden, waiting. His hands instinctively brushed over the reins of his horse, ready for any trouble, but the forest was silent. The wind shifted, rustling the leaves in a way that made him stop. He squinted toward the shadows. Was it his imagination? No, he could feel it, the eyes of someone watching. The woman moved closer, using the trees for cover. She wanted to see him, to understand him. He was unaware of her, yet she studied him closely. She saw the careful way he checked the forest, the thoughtful way he moved. He was not just a man passing through. He was a man who belonged to this land in some small way. That fascinated her. She decided to test him to see how he would react if he knew he was being watched. Thomas continued walking, taking long, cautious steps. He paused again, noticing a broken branch ahead of him. Someone had been there before him, leaving signs that they wanted to remain hidden. He crouched slightly, examining the trail. His instincts told him to be careful, and his heart beat faster with the thrill of unknown danger. But Thomas was a patient man. He did not panic. Instead, he slowed down and began observing his surroundings with more attention. The forest seemed alive with whispers, every sound telling a story. The woman watched silently, her eyes scanning his face and hands. She noticed how calm he remained despite the uncertainty. Most people would have rushed, shouted, or tried to escape. Not him. He moved with purpose, carefully considering every step. That impressed her. She wanted to see more of him, to understand why he was so different from the others who wandered into the woods. Suddenly, Thomas heard a faint crack behind him. He turned quickly, but the trees were still, casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. He could not see anyone, yet he knew he was not alone. He whispered to himself, "Who's there?" His voice was steady, showing no fear, only curiosity. The woman smiled slightly. She liked that. He was not afraid, but he was aware. That made him worthy of her attention. She decided to make her presence known, but only a little. A small leaf fell near his foot, startling him slightly. He looked around, noticing the leaf move against the wind in an unnatural way. He bent down, picking it up carefully, examining it. "Someone's here," he muttered softly. But instead of calling for help, he continued walking slowly, letting his mind absorb every detail. The woman followed, careful not to reveal herself completely. She moved like a shadow between the trees, blending with the forest. She watched him interact with the environment, how he avoided breaking branches unnecessarily, how he seemed to respect the small creatures scurrying in the underbrush. She noticed a small pile of rocks he had arranged to mark a trail. He was thoughtful, leaving signs not just for himself, but for anyone who might need guidance. Thomas felt the tension growing, a strange mix of excitement and caution. He had been in the woods many times, but today felt different. There was a presence, intelligent and careful, moving with him, yet not directly confronting him. He wondered if it was an animal, but no animal moved like that. It was human, and he knew it. The thought did not frighten him. Instead, it made him more alert, more aware of the forest around him. As the afternoon passed, the woman allowed herself to be seen just briefly. A shadow flitted between the trees, and Thomas caught a glimpse of her eyes, dark, intelligent, and intense. She vanished before he could react, leaving only the memory of her gaze. He stood still, trying to process what he had just seen. His curiosity grew stronger. Who was she? Why was she watching him? He decided to play a careful game. He left small signs of his own, placing twigs and leaves in ways that indicated he was aware of being followed. He wanted to communicate without confrontation, to show that he respected the forest and its hidden observer. The woman noticed immediately, impressed by his understanding. Most people would have ignored her presence or acted foolishly. Thomas moved differently. He moved with thought, with awareness, with respect. The light began to change as the sun moved toward the horizon. Shadows lengthened, and the forest became more mysterious. Thomas reached a small clearing where he often stopped to rest. He tied his horse to a sturdy tree, letting it graze on the dry grass. He sat on a fallen log, scanning the forest, waiting. He hoped to see her again, the woman who had captured his attention. The woman watched from a distance, hidden behind a thick cluster of trees. She studied him quietly, noting every movement. She was careful, knowing that revealing herself too soon could scare him away. She had seen many settlers enter her lands, and most were loud, clumsy, or disrespectful. But this man, he was different. He moved like he belonged to the land, like he understood it in a way few outsiders could. That fascinated her. She stepped closer, careful to remain unseen, but the sound of a branch snapping under her weight caught Thomas's attention. He looked up sharply, eyes scanning the shadows. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He did not speak, and neither did she, yet something unspoken connected them in that moment. It was a recognition of skill, of awareness, of intelligence. The forest grew quieter as the evening approached. Birds settled in their nests, and the wind whispered through the trees. Thomas felt a strange calm, as if the forest itself had paused to watch this unusual meeting. He continued to observe the shadows, learning more about the woman's presence with each passing minute. He understood that she was not there to harm him. She was testing him, observing him, learning about him as he did about the forest. Hours passed, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. Thomas finally stood, brushing the dirt from his clothes. He had learned something important today. The forest was alive with more than trees and animals. It was alive with people, with mysteries waiting to be discovered. And he had encountered one of those mysteries, a woman who moved like a shadow, yet had the eyes of someone who could see deeply into his soul. The woman watched him leave the clearing, a small smile playing on her lips. She had not yet approached him directly, but she felt a connection forming. He was worthy of her attention, not because he was brave or strong, but because he was thoughtful, respectful, and aware. She decided that their paths would cross again, and when they did, it would be different. This was only the beginning of their story, a slow dance of curiosity, respect, and quiet fascination. As Thomas disappeared into the deeper woods, the woman melted back into the shadows. She moved silently, almost as if she were part of the trees themselves. Tonight, she would watch him from afar, learning more about him, preparing for the moment when their paths would truly meet. The forest was quiet again, but a sense of anticipation lingered, like the air before a storm. Something extraordinary was about to unfold, and both the man and the woman, though unaware of it yet, would be changed forever by this encounter in the lonely woods. The next morning, the forest seemed quieter than usual. Sunlight filtered through the tall trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Thomas walked carefully, his eyes scanning the path ahead. He remembered the shadow he had seen yesterday, the brief glimpse of the woman's eyes. Something about that moment had lingered in his mind. He could not explain why, but he felt a mix of curiosity and respect. He had a sense that this encounter was not a simple coincidence. Hidden among the trees, the Apache woman observed him again. She had spent the night considering what she had seen in him. Most men who came into these woods were careless, loud, or arrogant. Thomas was none of those things. He moved with awareness, with caution, and with thought. She wanted to see how he would react if he knew he was being watched. She decided today to test him in a subtle way, not to frighten him, but to understand his character. Thomas walked slowly, following a familiar trail through the underbrush. His horse trotted beside him, but he kept his senses sharp. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made him pause. He knew instinctively that someone or something was nearby. He began leaving small signs of his own, breaking branches carefully or arranging stones in a pattern that showed he was aware of being observed. It was a silent conversation, a game between him and the unknown watcher. The woman moved silently, always keeping a safe distance. She wanted him to notice her, to understand that she was there, but she did not want to reveal herself fully yet. She followed his movements, watching how he treated the forest and the creatures within it. He approached a stream and knelt to drink water. His hands moved gently over the surface, disturbing the water as little as possible. A small fish darted away, and he watched it swim to safety. That small act, so simple and unnoticed by most people, impressed her. He respected life in every form, even in the smallest creatures. As the day passed, she continued to observe him from the shadows. She noticed how he paused to check for animal tracks, how he avoided stepping on delicate plants, and how he moved with a calm confidence. She had seen many men in these woods, but few carried themselves with such awareness. Most were reckless or fearful. Thomas, however, seemed to belong here in some way, and that fascinated her. At one point, Thomas reached a small clearing where he needed to rest and repair a part of his horse's harness. He set down his tools carefully, laying them out in order, and began working. The woman crept closer, curious to see how he managed the task. She noticed his patience, his attention to detail, and the way he treated his horse with care and understanding. The horse nuzzled him gently, and he spoke softly to calm it. That gentle command, filled with respect rather than force, revealed his true nature. She felt a growing admiration for him. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind Thomas. He froze instantly, listening. His eyes darted toward the sound, but again he could see nothing. Instead of fear, he felt a strange excitement. He knew someone was near, and he welcomed it. Most people would have panicked, but Thomas remained calm. He placed a small stick across the trail behind him, a subtle sign that he understood he was being followed. It was a silent communication, a challenge, and a test at the same time. The woman watched from behind a tree, smiling faintly. He had noticed her presence without seeing her. That proved he was not only cautious but also intelligent and patient. She wanted to see how he would act if the chase continued. She decided to follow him more closely, testing his skills but still keeping herself hidden. Hours passed, and the two moved through the forest in this quiet game of awareness. The woman followed silently, observing Thomas as he worked with the land, tending to his horse and clearing a path through thick underbrush. She saw the respect he had for the forest, for the animals, and for the simple life he led. Each small action told her more about who he was. She admired his courage, his patience, and his careful approach to everything he did. Thomas, though unaware of her exact location, sensed the presence of someone watching him. He felt a mixture of anticipation and respect for this unseen observer. The forest was alive with signs, and he could interpret them. He left subtle markers on his path, a broken twig here, a small pile of stones there, showing that he was aware but not threatened. It was a silent exchange, a growing connection without words. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Thomas reached a ridge overlooking a valley. He paused to rest, taking in the view. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh water. He could feel the life of the forest all around him. For a moment he closed his eyes and let the peace of the forest fill him. He felt as though he was not alone, and in a strange way, that gave him comfort rather than fear. The woman moved closer, intrigued by this man who seemed so at home in the forest. She observed how he sat, relaxed but alert, listening to the forest and watching for any sign of danger. She could see the intelligence in his eyes, the awareness in his posture, and the respect in his every movement. She decided to make her presence slightly more obvious. A leaf fell from a tree directly in front of Thomas, landing near his hand. He looked down and noticed it moving unnaturally against the wind. He reached out, examining it carefully, and smiled softly. "You're clever," he whispered, knowing somehow that the watcher was nearby. He had not seen her yet, but he could sense her intelligence. He respected it, and he felt a growing curiosity about the person behind the shadow. The woman felt a thrill of excitement. She had never met a man who responded to her presence with respect and curiosity rather than fear or aggression. Most would have shouted, fled, or tried to fight, but Thomas remained calm, intelligent, and aware. She felt drawn to him, not by desire, but by admiration and the challenge of understanding him. She moved silently, testing him further, observing how he reacted to subtle changes in the forest. As the day turned toward evening, Thomas began making his way back toward his ranch. He kept his senses alert, scanning the forest for signs of danger. He thought about the watcher, the mysterious presence he had felt all day. He could not see her clearly, but he could feel her intelligence and awareness. He respected her skills, and he wondered who she was. The woman followed, careful not to be seen, yet closer than before. She watched him interact with the forest, noticing his respect for life and his understanding of the land. She saw how he handled challenges, how he adapted to the environment, and how he treated the creatures around him. She began to feel a quiet admiration growing within her, a recognition that this man was different from anyone she had ever known. As the sun dipped lower, the forest grew more mysterious. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the sounds of nocturnal animals began to emerge. Thomas paused again, sensing movement in the shadows. He looked carefully, catching a glimpse of something, a fleeting shadow, a movement among the trees. Their eyes met briefly. The woman's gaze was sharp, intelligent, and curious. She smiled faintly before vanishing into the shadows again. Thomas stood still for a moment, trying to process what he had seen. He did not feel fear, only curiosity and respect. He understood that this was not a threat but a challenge, an encounter with someone equally skilled and aware of the forest. He felt a strange connection, an unspoken understanding that this meeting was more than chance. The woman continued to follow him, her heart filled with anticipation. She had never met a man like Thomas, someone who combined strength with patience, courage with awareness. She knew that their paths would cross again, and when they did, the connection would grow stronger. She moved silently through the trees, blending with the shadows, feeling a bond forming that was quiet, subtle, but powerful. As Thomas returned to the edge of the forest near his ranch, the sky was painted with colors of orange and pink. He paused, looking back into the trees, sensing the presence that had accompanied him all day. He smiled softly, a feeling of calm and excitement mixing in his chest. He knew that this encounter was only the beginning, that someone in the woods had noticed him, studied him, and recognized something special in him. The woman lingered at the forest's edge, watching him disappear from sight. She felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. She had tested him, observed him, and learned about him without a single word exchanged. She admired his intelligence, his patience, and his respect for life. For the first time, she felt that someone in the world, even a man from outside her people, could match her understanding and awareness. Night fell, and the forest became still and quiet. The woman retreated into the shadows, her mind replaying the day's events. Thomas had passed her test without even realizing it. He had moved with courage and respect, with patience and intelligence. She knew that their story was just beginning, and that the forest, which had always been her home and protector, had now brought her into the path of someone extraordinary. A quiet excitement filled the air, unspoken but deeply felt. Two lives, once separate, had now begun a silent dance in the forest, each aware of the other, each learning, each observing. And though the woman had yet to reveal herself fully, and Thomas had yet to see her clearly, both knew that this meeting was significant. Something powerful, something unexpected, and something life-changing had begun in the lonely woods. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension in the forest. Thomas continued his work, checking on the cattle, repairing fences, and moving through the woods with his usual careful attention. But something had changed. He no longer felt alone. There was a presence nearby, invisible yet undeniable. Every so often, he would notice small signs that someone had been there. A moved branch, a carefully placed stone, or a fleeting shadow among the trees. Each sign filled him with curiosity rather than fear. He felt as though the forest itself had become alive with intelligence, and he suspected it was not just the trees and animals he sensed. The Apache woman followed him at a distance, no longer with the intent to test him, but to observe and understand him more deeply. She had seen his strength, his patience, and his awareness, and she felt a growing admiration for him. She moved silently, studying how he interacted with the forest, with the animals, and with life itself. She noticed small things that most people would never see. The way he adjusted his movements to avoid disturbing the birds, how he cleared paths for small creatures, how he treated his horse not as property, but as a companion. Each action told her more about who he was, and each moment increased her respect. One afternoon, Thomas paused by a small creek to refill his water canteen. As he knelt by the water, the Apache woman stepped closer, curious to see him up close. She wanted to understand how he handled everyday challenges, how he thought, and how he cared for the world around him. Thomas, sensing movement behind him, turned slowly. Their eyes met for a brief moment. There was no fear in his gaze, only calm awareness and quiet curiosity. He spoke softly, not knowing if she could hear him. "I know you're there, you don't need to hide anymore." The woman froze, surprised by his words. He had sensed her, and yet he spoke to her gently. That simple acknowledgement felt different from the cautious, tense encounters of the past. She stepped out from behind the trees, revealing herself fully for the first time. Her long, dark hair framed her face, and her eyes were sharp and intelligent, scanning him carefully. Thomas did not flinch. He observed her calmly, studying her movements, her posture, her presence. There was no judgment in his eyes, only respect and interest. They studied each other in silence for a long moment, two people who had been aware of each other for days finally meeting face to face. The woman finally spoke, her voice quiet but strong. "You move well in these woods. Most men do not notice the signs." "Most men are careless," Thomas nodded slightly. "I try to be careful. The forest has its own life. I respect it, and I respect anyone who knows it well." The woman's lips curved into a small, approving smile. He understood without knowing the depth of her culture, yet his words carried honesty and awareness. From that day, their encounters became more frequent, though still cautious. The woman would appear near Thomas's path, helping him navigate tricky terrain, silently guiding him away from dangerous routes or unstable ground. At first, he did not know it was her helping, but he noticed a subtle shift in the path, a smoothness where it had once been rough. When he realized someone had been there, he looked around, and there she was, just far enough to remain unseen, yet close enough to watch him notice. Thomas began leaving small signs in return. A broken branch laid across a trail, a small pile of stones arranged carefully, or a mark on a tree, all subtle signals that he had noticed her and understood her presence. The woman watched these gestures with increasing admiration. He was not just aware, he was intelligent, patient, and thoughtful. He responded to her guidance without fear or arrogance, and he respected her space and independence. One morning, a sudden rainstorm swept through the forest. The sky darkened, and the first drops began to fall, followed quickly by a steady downpour. Thomas moved quickly, seeking shelter under a large rock overhang. The Apache woman, already nearby, emerged from the trees. She gestured to him, silently inviting him to share her small covered space. He nodded and stepped closer. They stood side by side, listening to the rain and feeling the damp earth beneath their feet. Neither spoke at first. There was a quiet comfort in their shared silence. They began to talk softly, exchanging simple words about the forest, the weather, and the animals. Each word built trust. Thomas learned some of her language, enough to greet her and thank her. She began to understand his words, even if they were foreign to her. Slowly, a bond formed, one built on mutual respect, curiosity, and quiet admiration. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened. The Apache woman showed Thomas secret paths through the forest, hidden springs, and safe spots where the deer and other animals gathered. He shared with her stories of the ranch, his family, and the work he had done since childhood. They laughed quietly over small accidents, spilled water, tangled rope, a horse startled by a sudden noise. These small moments of shared experience strengthened their trust. One day, while climbing a ridge together, Thomas slipped slightly on loose soil. The woman grabbed his arm instinctively, steadying him with skill and strength. His eyes met hers, and in that brief instant, something shifted. It was not just survival, it was connection. They realized that they were watching out for each other, learning about each other in ways that words could never fully capture. Even at night, their bond grew. When Thomas camped in the forest, he noticed the subtle signs of her presence. The careful arrangement of twigs, a small fire kept at a distance, the soft rustle of movement nearby. He no longer feared these signs. Instead, he felt comforted, as though he had found a companion who understood the forest as deeply as he did. She, in turn, watched him, noting his patience as he built his campfire, tended to his horse, and prepared food. She admired his calm, steady nature and the quiet way he approached challenges. As days turned into weeks, Thomas and the woman began to rely on each other in small ways. He learned to trust her guidance through the forest, and she learned to trust his judgment. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, though always quiet and respectful. They shared knowledge, how to find water, how to track animals, how to recognize signs of weather changes. Each lesson built understanding and mutual respect. One afternoon, Thomas was repairing a fence near the edge of the forest when a small injury slowed him down. A sharp piece of wood had cut his hand. The woman appeared almost instantly, tending to the wound with gentle hands and careful attention. Thomas looked at her, grateful and impressed by her skill. "Thank you," he said softly. She nodded, not needing words to convey her understanding. That act, simple and human, solidified a growing trust between them. Their bond extended beyond mere survival or practicality. There was a subtle emotional connection forming, an unspoken understanding of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. The woman admired Thomas's patience and respect for life. Thomas admired her intelligence, courage, and skill. They began to anticipate each other's movements, intuitively responding to one another in the forest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, they sat together near a calm stream. The water reflected the colors of the sky, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. For a long time they spoke quietly, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, and the lives they had led. Thomas spoke of his family and the ranch he cared for. She spoke of her people, the lessons she had learned in the forest, and the traditions that shaped her life. Despite their differences in culture and experience, they found common ground. Both loved the forest, both respected life, and both valued patience, awareness, and strength. Each story they shared brought them closer, each smile and gesture built trust, and each moment of silence strengthened their connection. They did not need to speak of love yet. The bond was forming quietly, naturally, and without force. As night fell and stars appeared above, they sat side by side, feeling the comfort of shared presence. The forest, once a place of solitude and careful observation, had become a space of connection. The woman, who had once tracked him from the shadows, now sat openly near him, learning, watching, and understanding. Thomas, who had once felt a mysterious presence in the forest, now felt a companion, someone who shared his respect for life and awareness of the world around them. In those quiet, unhurried moments, something remarkable was happening. A foundation was being built, not of words, promises, or ceremonies, but of shared experiences, mutual respect, and the understanding that each had something unique to offer. They learned to trust each other, to anticipate each other's needs, and to honor the boundaries and strengths of the other. The forest, which had been a place of tests, shadows, and observation, had transformed into a space of learning, growth, and connection. Each day brought new lessons, new stories, and new opportunities to deepen the bond between them. The Apache woman began to realize that this man, Thomas, was unlike any she had encountered. And Thomas began to understand that this woman, quiet, strong, and intelligent, was someone who would change the way he viewed the forest, life, and companionship. By the end of the week, their trust had become evident. Thomas no longer walked alone in the forest without expecting her guidance. She no longer followed him in secret, but openly moved beside him, sharing knowledge and observing his actions with admiration. What had started as a silent game of awareness had evolved into a partnership, built on respect, curiosity, and a growing emotional connection. And so, in the heart of the lonely woods, two lives that had once been separate began to intertwine. Their days were filled with quiet laughter, shared knowledge, and the deepening understanding that they could rely on each other. The bond that had begun with observation and careful testing had grown into a subtle, unspoken connection. Each knew the other's strengths, each respected the other's space, and each felt the first stirrings of a trust that could withstand any challenge the forest, or life, might present. The forest had grown quiet that morning, filled only with the soft whispers of the wind through the tall trees. Thomas moved carefully along the familiar path, but this time he did not feel alone. Beside him, the Apache woman walked with quiet confidence, moving like a shadow yet fully present, a silent partner in his journey. Their trust in each other had grown steadily over the weeks, and today it would be tested in a way neither had anticipated. The day began peacefully, with sunlight filtering through the branches and birds singing in the canopy above. They were following the trail to check on a distant part of Thomas's ranch, where the cattle grazed near a small stream. The terrain grew rougher, with rocky slopes and thick underbrush, and Thomas knew that this journey required both skill and attention. He glanced at her, feeling grateful for her presence. She had become more than a guide. She had become a companion, someone whose awareness matched his own. As they reached a narrow valley, a sudden rustling of leaves and snapping of branches alerted them. From the shadows, a pack of wild animals appeared, startled and aggressive. Perhaps frightened by the approaching storm that had begun to roll in, they rushed forward, their movements quick and unpredictable. Thomas reacted instinctively, moving in front of his horse to block the animals, while the woman assessed the situation carefully. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the terrain for safe escape routes and potential threats. Without a word, they moved together. Thomas guided the horse calmly, speaking softly to keep it from panicking. The Apache woman directed him toward a safer path, stepping lightly among the rocks and fallen logs. Every movement was precise, calculated, and careful. The animals, confused and nervous, eventually turned away from the pair, giving them a narrow path to safety. For a moment they both stood in silence, catching their breath, the adrenaline of the encounter slowly fading. Thomas looked at her, admiration in his eyes. "You saved us," he said quietly. She shook her head, smiling faintly. "We saved each other," she replied. The near danger had strengthened their bond. It was not just about survival. It was about trust, understanding, and shared courage. Thomas realized that she had become an inseparable part of his life, someone whose presence made the forest safer, brighter, and more meaningful. She, in turn, recognized that his calm, patient nature and his respect for the forest made him someone rare and worthy of companionship. As they continued along the path, the clouds thickened overhead, and a gentle rain began to fall. They sought shelter under a large overhanging rock and waited for the storm to pass. Sitting side by side, they shared food and water quietly, exchanging stories of their lives while listening to the rhythm of the rain. Thomas spoke of his childhood on the ranch, of the lessons his father had taught him about responsibility, patience, and respect for the land. She listened intently, fascinated by his experiences and the wisdom he carried. She shared her own stories, recounting her upbringing among the Apache people, the lessons she had learned about survival, courage, and living in harmony with the forest. Thomas listened with genuine interest, realizing how much he could learn from her, not just about the forest but about life itself. Their stories flowed naturally, creating a bridge between their different worlds, showing how shared respect and understanding could unite even the most unlikely companions. The storm passed, leaving the forest fresh and glistening with raindrops. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting golden beams that danced across the wet leaves. They continued their journey, moving with careful precision. Their teamwork had grown instinctive. They no longer needed words to guide each other. Thomas adjusted his steps to match hers when crossing unstable ground. She moved close to him when the terrain became slippery, her hand brushing lightly against his when necessary. Every action reinforced the trust that had taken weeks to build. As they neared the edge of the forest, a steep slope leading to the ranch, Thomas paused. He looked at the woman, realizing that this moment, this journey, had brought them closer than either had expected. He saw the strength in her eyes, the courage in her stance, and the intelligence in every decision she made. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider a life beyond the woods, a life that included her. She noticed the change in his expression and the hesitation in his movements. She had observed him for weeks, seen how he interacted with the world, and now she realized that he was beginning to trust her completely. She felt a surge of emotion, a quiet, steady certainty that this man, who had proven himself through patience, courage, and respect, was someone she could choose to stand beside. Thomas reached the bottom of the slope and turned to her. "I don't know what the future holds," he said softly, "but I want you to be part of it. I don't want to walk this path alone anymore." The Apache woman regarded him for a moment, considering his words. She had always been independent, strong, and self-reliant, but she had also recognized something rare in him. A man who understood her, who respected her, and who had proven his worth not through words but through actions. Slowly, she stepped closer. "I have watched you," she said, her voice steady, "and I have learned that you are patient, brave, and honest. You respect life and you respect me. I choose to stand with you not because I need protection, but because I trust you and wish to share my path with you." Thomas felt a warmth spread through him, a mixture of relief, admiration, and happiness. He extended his hand gently, and she took it without hesitation. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of weeks of trust, understanding, and shared experiences. They walked the final stretch toward the ranch together, side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, silent communication passing between them. The land that had once been ordinary and familiar now felt alive with new possibilities. The rancher's life had been predictable, filled with the routines of tending cattle and maintaining the land. But now, with her presence, each day promised new discoveries, new lessons, and the quiet joy of companionship. When they reached the ranch, the animals seemed to sense the change as well. The horses moved calmly, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the forest at the edge seemed to welcome them. Thomas led her through the familiar paths, showing her the fields, the barns, and the small homestead he had maintained for years. She observed everything carefully, appreciating the simplicity and honesty of his life. She saw the dedication and care he had poured into this land, and it only deepened her respect for him. Over the next few weeks, their partnership grew naturally. The Apache woman adapted to life at the ranch, not by giving up her independence, but by integrating her skills and knowledge into the work they shared. She taught Thomas techniques for tracking animals, finding water, and moving through the forest with even greater awareness. He, in turn, shared his methods for maintaining the ranch, caring for the animals, and managing the land responsibly. Together, they became stronger, each learning from the other, each contributing to a life that neither could have imagined alone. Their bond was not marked by grand declarations, but by daily acts of trust and respect. Thomas learned to rely on her judgment and skill in the forest. She learned to appreciate his patience, kindness, and steady nature. They faced small challenges together, repairing fences after storms, tending to sick animals, or navigating difficult terrain, and each challenge only strengthened their connection. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant colors, they sat together on a hillside overlooking the fields. The air was filled with the scent of wild flowers and fresh grass. Thomas spoke softly. "I never imagined I would find someone who understands this land, who understands me. But here you are." The Apache woman smiled, a quiet, serene expression. "And I never imagined I would find someone whose respect matches my own. We are stronger together, and the forest has shown me that." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The forest, the fields, and the distant mountains were bathed in a warm glow. For the first time, they felt that they belonged not just to the land, but to each other. Their journey had begun with observation and caution, with silent tests and careful steps, but it had grown into a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and shared experiences. In the months that followed, their life at the ranch became a rhythm of work, learning, and quiet companionship. They faced challenges, of course: harsh weather, wild animals, and the unpredictable demands of rural life. But together they met each obstacle with patience and cooperation. Each day strengthened their bond, each shared experience deepened their understanding of one another, and each act of care and trust reinforced the choice they had made to stand together. The Apache woman and Thomas had chosen each other not out of necessity, fear, or obligation, but because of mutual respect, admiration, and the recognition of each other's strengths. Their union was a testament to patience, understanding, and the quiet power of shared experiences. The forest, once a place of testing and observation, had become a symbol of the connection they had built, a place where two lives once separate had found a shared path. Years later, when they looked back on that first encounter in the lonely woods, they remembered the suspense, the curiosity, and the subtle tests that had led them to one another. The forest had been the stage for their meeting, the witness to their growing trust, and the guardian of the bond they had formed. And in that quiet, enduring connection, they found not only companionship but a shared life filled with respect, understanding, and the quiet joy of walking together, side by side, through the world they had both come to love.